This is the Leaders on Fire podcast. On this show, we'll be inviting guests in to talk about crucible moments in their lives and unpack how it developed character and perseverance and how they emerged as leaders on fire. We hope that this podcast is an encouragement and an inspiration to you. This episode is part 2 of our podcast with John and Tim, the founders of the Bible Project. If you didn't get a chance to listen to episode 1, please go and do so. It is awesome. Today, we're going to dig in a little bit deeper with them, and we're going to enter the crucible, and we're going to hear from them crucible moments in their life that shaped their character and their leadership. So let's welcome them back to the show. Tim and John, welcome back. Glad to have you again.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Drew.
Last episode, we dug into this idea of the crucible, and we unpacked what that looks like scripturally, and we had some good discussions around that. And so it really sets us up for this next phase of the podcast, which is where we actually enter into the crucible. We're going to bring those experiences, those emotions, those feelings back onto the table and kind of process those. And so I'd like to ask you guys, to get vulnerable and maybe share about a crucible moment or season in your life. Maybe it's related to the Bible Project, maybe it's not, but just want to be able to unpack that. And again, the point of this is to encourage our listeners that everyone's going to go through crucibles, and I say that plural. Everyone's going to go through them, varying degrees and for varying purposes. And so, the idea is that, sharing your story really as a way to encourage other people who may be in a crucible now or have been through some in the past, or for those who come to one in the future, they can maybe reflect back on your words and maybe what your perspective was. And that might even be the rawness of what you felt, like, this really stinks, or Lord, get me out of this, or I'm not down with this test, whatever it may be. Like, there's the realness factor of it. And we see King David, boy, he sure expressed the realness of these things in his writings, the very realness, very raw feelings of the crucible moments, right? But then he also rejoiced on the other end of those oftentimes. And so anyways, just to set that up, I want to turn that over to you guys and say, hey, what would you like to share about crucible moments in your own lives?
Reflecting on that question, and thinking about Bible Project and the beginnings of Bible Project, a really hard but important time in my life was selling the business that I was in. It was actually 2 businesses. One I just kind of let go, and one I sold. And particularly the one that I sold was really connected to this, for me, like this sense of who I was as a creative. It gave me identity. And it was also connected to some really meaningful relationships. People I didn't want to let down. But God was making really clear to me that my time in the business was coming to an end, and that I wanted to try to figure out how to juggle still owning the business, but not really participating in the business. And God kind of gave me this conviction that He wanted me to be kind of single-minded and focused on just one thing. And I think it was maybe some grace in my life, like I'm not good at juggling too many things. But what made it so hard was that not just the relationships, but really my identity of being a successful creative, being able to do something that creates value, and it felt kind of like failure to walk away, also it made me have to come to terms with some priorities in my life that weren't being consistent. Like I really wanted to value a kind of workplace culture that celebrated creativity and had space and time for really good work. but that wasn't really present in the business. I wanted to have a kind of business where you had a pace that was healthy for family life. And I was really a workaholic in the business. And so it was a lot of stepping away from like frameworks that were unhealthy, but I felt like were bringing success, or at least just kind of were continue to be alluring. So just all of those things, you got relationships that are meaningful, you got identity, you've got just these habits that you're stuck in, and to just have to make this call of like, I'm just gonna just pull the Band-Aid off and just be done. I don't know what that means for my future. I don't know what that means financially, all the things, was really, really hard. It was a year-long process, with some real moments of angst and depression and frustration, and so coming out of it though, it kind of gave me a vision for what kind of company do I want to be a part of? Like, what kind of culture do we want to create here? What kind of leader do I need to be? I kind of realized that I had subjugated a lot of my own leadership in the company, that by the time certain things started mattering to me, I didn't have the authority in the organization to really make changes that I wanted to make. So what does it mean to be a leader and to actually just own authority? I have a relationship with authority that's kind of like difficult. Like, I don't like to be the guy to tell people what to do. But if you believe in something and you want to create something that you can believe in, then you kind of have to step into those shoes. So coming into the Bible Project, and then us being able to just really begin to dream, like, what kind of culture do we want here? What's our values? What's our pace? What are we building? We got to really, I think because I went through all that in such a intense way, we got to be a lot more bold, I think, and a lot more creative in setting like some of the things that have continued to shape what Bible Project is today.
So you said it was about a year-long process, and you had a lot of different emotions in there. You said there was pressures, there was depression, angst. How did you cope? Like, did you have a vision of God calling you to something? So did that keep you going? Because oftentimes, if there's a call to something else that you're going, it can help you get through it. I guess better. I don't know if that's the right word, or persevere. So was it a vision that got you through that? Okay, God's taking me here, or was it an unknown? Like, I'm stepping into this, and there's all these unknowns. Like, how did you process? What was your relationship like with Jesus during that time, and your faith and your trust? Like, talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, we had started Bible Project, but it was still just kind of a volunteer on the side. Who knows what this will become? I had started to scheme up what some other consultancy business I could start was, but neither of those felt like a thing that gave me enough vision and focus to take away all the angst. And what there was a kind of a key moment though. I mean, a lot of it started coming down to, in the business, a lot of the ways that we would, as business partners, validate ourselves and our success was with the money that was coming in. And then it kind of created this culture of the money as a scorecard, and the money as a sign of God's blessing in your life. And in reality, walking away from the business felt like the foolish thing to do, money-wise. And it created a lot of angst for me because I felt like maybe that was my one time as a creative to really strike gold. The business was working, right? Like, and if I step away from it, what if it doesn't happen again? What if I can't find a job that I enjoy? And what if I can't find a job at all? Like, what if I can't afford the house I'm living in anymore? And all these things and I started to spiral, and all around just kind of the scarcity, like there might not be enough. And it was at that moment, kind of at the depths of that spiraling, where God met me and was, you know, however this works, having a conversation with God where I hearing God be like, what are you afraid of? What are you really afraid of? And me trying to explain to God, like, well, I'm afraid that I'm going to do a job that I hate doing. Like, that's going to be a miserable life. In fact, I'm actually really afraid of just not being able to provide for my family. And like, these are my fears. And I just remember hearing from God, like, won't I still be enough? And can you still have a good life? Even if you had a job you didn't like, even if your family had to move in with someone else, like, can you still, like, be happy? And I was like, oh yeah, actually I could. I still have my family. I still, like, like, all the things that matter. Like, why was I putting so much into this, like, into income, into me being able to pursue my creative passions? Like, why was that driving me so much? And just with, like, this one question, I feel like God just kind of ripped that from me. And it was at the right time, because, like, I was kind of ready to get rid of it because it was creating so much angst for me. And so at that moment, I just kind of felt free from it. And we weren't done yet with trying to figure out how I was going to exit. But that moment, there was just this sense of not worrying anymore. Like, I'll get what I get. We'll move on. Whatever the next season is, like, I don't need to ultimately worry about that. Like, God is enough, and I have enough.
And it's interesting, when you think about, the fire melting away the impurities. It's like we tend to think, and we desire to be able to do that on our own, or through our own strength and our own will, that we can get better and we can be refined, if we study enough and do enough. But it sounds to me like, John, you were in a place in life where this stuff needed shed, and it needed melted away, and it could have only happened through this type of calling from God, calling you out of that business to get rid of it and to move on. Through that process, that year process, sounds like it was, you emerged as what we'd say as a leader on fire. And you probably wouldn't have chosen to go through that. You couldn't have self-inflicted angst or self-inflicted depression or whatever these things are. God had to lead you through that. And so, yes, it was for the purpose of the future, for sure, like what you and Tim have launched. But to me, it sounds like it also was necessary for some just character refinement to actually prepare you for what was next. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to reflect on that through that lens. It's kind of easy to just move on, and it was kind of quickly after that. I mean, within the next 12 months or so, I probably really kicked into gear. So I didn't have to kind of sit in this wondering what's going on for very long. But yeah, you're right. Like, I think the way I've decided to show up here at Bible Project, the way we want to build things here, a lot of that was informed. And I think I still would have had the same intuitions, but I don't think I would have the same courage to really lean into them if I hadn't had those experiences.
Tim, what's on your mind? You got anything you want to share?
Yeah, I do. But also, I'm just reflecting on your journey, John. I remember all of that. Mostly it involved us taking walks and having lunch and, like, talking about as you were going through all of that. That was that was an intense season for you. I think what's interesting, I also have memories of that season because I was going through a related kind of journey in terms of vocational identity. That actually, as I reflect back and hear you talk about it, I think was a little less intense, but was, significant for me nonetheless. And I think it was around, I never had clarity about where I was supposed to do my thing. So I came to faith through the skateboard outreach ministry. And so just the creativity of a local church and some spirit-led leaders, like that was my entry into all the good things in my life of the journey of following Jesus. So I've always had a real like heartbeat and commitment to just the life of the local church in a place connecting to the people where they live. But as I went through my education, I always ended up being more nerdy and wanting to pursue learning and my I don't know, things I was curious about more than any of my friends who were going into pastoral ministry. And so I loved learning Greek and Hebrew. And I ended up creating like personal reading groups with all my professors because I just couldn't learn enough. And they would end up asking me to teach classes for them when they had to go out of town or something. And so I just loved it. And so that kind of put me on this path. Well, I guess I would love to go do graduate school and go do a PhD, and I guess to go be a professor, because that's what you do. If you learn, you want to commit to that kind of self-inflicted suffering. But I loved it. So I think it was just never clear to me. But then when I went to graduate school and I began doing like teacher's aid and teaching classes in a university setting, it was really dissatisfying because none of the students in the class, like hardly any of them cared to be there. They were fulfilling, a requirement. And so I ended up going back into the local church as I was finishing my PhD and really loved it at the church we were at in Wisconsin. But I had this thing about the urban setting and my skate church roots and wanting to come back to Portland. And so I ended up coming on to up the pastoral team, or just the second pastor at a brand new church, not very far from where we are right now. And it was an amazing season. It was so rich. And it was a small pastoral team and just lots of, 20 to 40 somethings in urban Portland. It's the Wild West out here. and so some parts of it I loved, but I think other parts of it in my education and my real introverted nature were really being neglected in that season. So there was a high demand, high extroverted season of my life. And then over the years, it began to catch up with me, living out of sync with some of my own kind of innate wiring and personality structure. And so I remember a number of years in, I was doing a wedding, and I experienced what I recognized the day after as a panic attack. And I could hardly go out and do this wedding. Like I was seeing spots, and my heart was beating crazy, and I was like, what is going on? And I think I was just so regularly putting myself in these public environments where I was like the one in charge of bringing leadership to the room or to this group or this problem or this crisis. And I just started to want to retreat all the time, to just go be by myself with a stack of books. And so the Bio Project was God's mercy in providing me an environment where I could bring creativity and maybe kind of a non-traditional way of expressing biblical scholarship in a way that I can teach, but also in a way that's allowed me to really keep my relational environment pretty small and work with a small circle of people and just work with that group of people for long periods of time, just on a handful of projects. And I get to read a lot, which is really great. So I think what I'm talking about is a vocational discernment journey. And I don't think I really knew how much wisdom there is in paying attention to who God's made you to be. And I fully recognize I'm in a very privileged time and place in history that I could find a vocational slot that aligns with my temperament and my personality and so on. Because many people, you just don't have those options. And so that itself is a crucible, you know. But my crucible was kind of giving up being the cool, hip, urban pastor guy and just recognizing that is just not who I'm made to be, and I can be okay with that, and letting go of a vision of myself that's how I'm going to fulfill what God's asked me to do with my life. So while there was some angst and stress involved in it, it was less intense in many ways than John's journey. It was happening at the same time as John was going through all of that. And so that became also a gift for us to be able to depart from the things we were doing. And there was a kind of surrender on both our parts that we were undergoing with our sense of identity. And then experiencing God's gift to us in this project of getting to do the things that actually we were made to do or wanted to do, but to do it in a way that feels like we're like a redeemed version of it. And not that it's been perfect, and not that there haven't been challenges, there have been, but my experience of it has been just a lot of grace and God's generosity for going through that season that was my version of a difficult season. At least my body thought it was difficult. It freaked out on
that
me.
matters. Yeah, listen to that.
Yeah. So maybe it's about sometimes we can have instilled in us visions of who we are and what we're supposed to be doing that truly didn't come from a journey of me and God. It comes from cultural expectations, social expectation. And this is not like the Disney message of be your authentic self necessarily, but there is something about discovering the unique vocation that God has for each of us, and that can be a difficult road to shed off versions of myself that I thought I am or want to be that actually is not what God has for me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. I have a similar journey of, where I spent the last couple decades in my life in business and in an operational capacity. And I'm a creative and an innovative person. And so I didn't have a lot of outlets for that in the 20 years of being in operations. And so, the last few years I've been able to get into the space that I absolutely love. And so now I'm able to create and innovate and teach and speak and do all the things I love now. But there's a piece of this, okay, that I want you guys to comment on before we close out. No matter how bad I prayed and actually wanted that, literally for the last, actually, when God called us to go to Papua New Guinea, we were missionaries there for 3 years. And when he called us back into the marketplace to do missions in the marketplace in 2013, I was disappointed that I was going back into the business world because I'd already gone through that crucible of giving up all of that to go be a missionary overseas in the jungle. And so I fully expected to stay kind of in the ministry lane. And so when he called me back into the marketplace to do missions, I accepted the call and went for it, but I still stepped back into that same kind of operational grind for another 10 years, and while trying to live out a missional leadership. So, but the thing is, during that time of that 10 years or so that I was back in the business, praying for, looking for any and every opportunity to kind of escape that so I could go be me, there's this element of time that is so necessary. And no matter how bad I wanted to get out of the crucible or that time of waiting, I was just simply not prepared yet. There was more to the story that God was writing that I needed to stay in that season of life longer. To really get to where I am at 44, you might say in my authentic self, just being me and in my vocation. So speak a little bit about time, because John, I'm sure you didn't want to take a year probably, and maybe even as the Bible Project's launched, maybe there's things that have just taken longer, or through your journey, Tim, of those different things you were going through. There's seasons of time that are necessary for preparation that we would rather not elect. I'd rather just hurry up and get there, and I would have rather been here 10 years ago, but I wasn't ready, nor would I have been effective. I wasn't and we're seasoned enough where God needed me. So Kind of speak into that a little bit. What are your thoughts around that?
Oh, wow. I just feel really fortunate. Like, just that experience with business, like it was hard, and everyone's version of hard is different. There was a year of just like flux, and the whole business, that whole journey through that business, which was like a 4 or 5 year journey, never felt comfortable. But there's going to be people who your whole life feels that way. And like you said, Drew, in the last episode, your crucible might not end until, until the heavens and earth unite. And so I'm wary of trying to say much about timing, because I just feel like I've been given many mercies in my life. I haven't really had to probably endure certain things to get a clear perspective on that. With the kind of things that people really struggle with, that cause some real pain and hurt. Not to minimize what I've gone through, but I can just imagine how much deeper these crucibles can go for people. All to say though, like, I believe in God's patience, and I believe in His mercy, and that for everyone's story it's gonna be a little different, and I'm not sure what that means in any particular situation.
Yeah, that's a good reflection. And truly, there are some crucibles that are 100% environmentally placed on us, meaning if there's an infliction of some sort, we don't have a choice. Like myself, John, Tim, the crucibles we were in, yes, we were following God, but we had a choice also, right? We also had a choice. And we had some role to play in that. There are some crucibles where, let's just say if you've gotten a disease or you've gotten a sickness, that you can't control that at all, And so this idea of time, and the reason why I brought it up is because for people who are in a crucible, like, you can get really anxious about time, like it should be faster or I shouldn't go through it. And so, the point is that the illustration that I gave with how long I was in something, compared to a year or compared to other journeys, is that, their time is relevant to only God's perspective and the work He's doing. And there are some things we just simply don't know the answer to and can figure out. And so, the whole point is like, how do we dig deep and trust in faith the work that's being done, looking to the scriptures, knowing that through these tests and through these trials, and through sometimes the thorn that's never removed, even though we've pleaded and prayed, this element of time is really His and His alone. So, Tim, what are your thoughts?
This whole time, my mind was following a thread about the 7-day creation narrative.
Of course.
And the concept of time in that story, that's kind of setting the framework for the biblical story. And then also to two passages that talk about, in Paul in Romans 5 and then James, about the journey of these crucibles lead us on a journey of character formation, the endurance that leads to endurance. And then Paul in his own way, and as James says, let endurance have its perfect result. And what's interesting about that word perfect, it's the word complete that comes from the seventh day story in Genesis, at the end of Genesis 1. It's actually the beginning of Genesis 2, about the skies and the land being finished, completed. It's the same word. So there's this conception, the ground zero for the biblical authors is that God is without change, as James says, meaning that God doesn't need to undergo a journey to get better. Like God just is infinite goodness. And in his generosity, God has created something that is not God, namely creation, and invites it to share in a journey toward the completeness that is a mirror of God's own completion. And but what that means is that anything that's not God, that's going to become complete, has to go on a journey. And that's the 7-day narrative is like it's an image about a journey through cycles of light and dark. And every day has evening and morning. Until you get to the 7th day in which everything's completed, and it's the only day in which it says there was no evening. It's sort of like the 7 days, an image of there being no more night, as the author of the Revelation puts it. So, in a way, it's baked into not being God. If you're not God, it means you're going to go on a journey, and it's going to be cycles of light and dark. And I guess the question is, what's worth entering into union with God's own goodness? Because I think that's probably what most of us are after, is a search for the good and a search for safety and shalom and peace. And we end up having to go through all these cycles to get there. Most of them we didn't ask for, that happened to us. And somehow the biblical story is trying to instill within us this patient hope that the cycles are headed in a direction towards completeness. So that's where my mind went as I was hearing John's story and hearing you talk. And I think, not all cultures view time this way. If you hold a view that you're trapped within karmic cycles, it's not a very hopeful way of viewing human existence. But the biblical story is trying to tell us that our cycles of going through the night are going somewhere. And in God's wisdom, he's taking us there. And the character formation we undergo along the way is indispensable to the journey. It can't be replaced by something else. Which is both not very good news and I guess the best news you could ask for.
If you had a mic in your hand, it just dropped, because that was a very powerful reflection, man. I mean, honestly, that was, I had not thought of it that way. I love that picture that you gave about the cycles and creation and it being complete and just the journey. Man, that's a great way to wrap things up, man. So good, distracted reflection as John was talking. Hopefully you listen to John normally, but I'm glad you didn't that time.
I was listening.
I'm just kidding.
Thinking about all that.
Yeah, no, that I'm gonna have to think back on that. That's pretty powerful, man. So thanks for sharing that. It just in context with this crucible discussion, I think that's a powerful way to end it. So, well, guys, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for chewing on this stuff with me. I pray that your stories and what we've talked about will be impactful to those who listened. And also, just if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to just pray over your ministry. I mean, the work that God has you guys doing is awesome, and it's reaching so many people. And I love it, and I pray that God would continue to find favor on the work that you're doing. So I'd like to just close this up in prayer, and then we'll wrap up. Is that cool? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Drew. Thank you.
Awesome. Lord, we just come before you today, Lord, and we lift up the Bible Project and their whole team and the organization, Lord, the purpose at which they exist, Lord, and it's to make your name known among the nations. And Lord, I just pray for gifting John and Tim with the skills and the abilities that you've given them, Lord, to be just a perfect picture of a team, complementing one another, Lord, to bring something to life that was in their hearts and in different ways and in different skill sets. And thank you for bringing them to the point to where they're at. Lord, we just pray for continued wisdom and favor and blessing over their ministry and the work that you're doing through the organization. We pray these things in your name. Amen.
Yeah, amen.
Guys, it's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate the time. And hopefully we are all emerging better as leaders on fire for getting to have this conversation with one another and getting to know each other. So thank you guys. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Perhaps it has prompted a painful memory or challenged you to reflect on times you were in the crucible. Some of you may be in a crucible now, but be encouraged. Maybe, just maybe, God is using this to refine your character so that you emerge as a leader on fire. If today's episode was an encouragement to you, share it with others who may also find encouragement in the Leaders on Fire podcast. So, let's go into the world sent out as leaders on fire. Until next time.